introduced are coarse cereals because under the NFSA, there is a provision for coarse cereals also. And within the product, there is a variety. I mean, there is a preference of the taste. I mean, what variety of rice, what variety of pulse. Like, for example, if you introduce chana dal in the south, I'm not sure if sambar would be made out of chana dal and if there would be more uptake for that. The third tier is about the quality. So when we talk about the product portfolio, we are talking about the product itself, we are talking about the variety, and we are also talking about the quality. My method is mixed. It's both quantitative and qualitative, and I'll give an explanation for the basis of that, because as you'll see through the course of this presentation, it really complements each other. And the focus of my study, and for the purposes of this conference, is on gender. And gender not per se, but gender in interaction with social identity also. So what is the larger principle of public distribution system? As we all know that it's aimed at mitigating the food and nutrition insecurity. It's meant for poor, the vulnerable, the likely to be food insecure, for the likely shocks. And I like to believe, and it has not been adequately addressed, is the role of women in public distribution system. I mean, it is well recognized that women's role in production, the consumption, they decide what to eat, when to eat, how to eat, and there has been no initiative in trying to understand what do women really want from the public distribution system, and especially from PDS, because their interface with the PDS is the maximum, because they stand in the line, they stand in the queue, and they face the brunt of the dealer, and if it is quality, and I'll argue it later, it becomes to the use of the time use pattern. So there are different pathways actually to look at gender from the PDS perspective, but one of the pathways, I mean, besides the delivery mechanisms and others attributes, I'm only focusing on the product portfolio today. This is the coverage. It has 3 states, that is Bihar, Eastern Uttar Pradesh, and Orissa. As you can see, that the sample is more from Bihar because that was the first leg of my research, and then we moved on to Eastern Uttar Pradesh and Orissa. The qualitative survey, of course, was also conducted across the 3 states. This is the sample distribution. I won't go into detail about that. This is the gender composition of the sample. I know there's a bias towards men here, but there's a substantial representation of women also in terms of 28% and 30%. So straight to the research question which I started, what do women prefer from PDS in terms of its product portfolio? I'll just straight away dash to the quant, some of the motivating descriptive stats for the basis for the regression. One is the pulse. The pulse, what is the preference of the pulse? If you go to the right-hand panel, if you see, there's this great Manhattan bar out there in the eastern UP where there is 86% of the beneficiaries really want pulse from the PDS. And even if you see the percentage of women preferring inclusion of pulses in the PDS, it's around 76%. But what is really intriguing is that if you see the all states data, and both for the overall for men and women, and for women, just for women, there is a 50-50. I mean, if you see there is 50%, more than, I think slightly 53% who say they want pulse, 46% they say don't want pulse. So almost a mix of 50-50 in preference of the pulse. So that is very intriguing, considering that pulse is very dear. It is costly. Who wouldn't want it? So these are some of my motivating questions which in the course of the presentation you'll see, which led me to really answer these questions in in-depth interviews. In terms of coarse cereals, we did not really ask this in Bihar and Eastern UP, but we covered it in the qualitative. But across all the 3 states, there was hardly any preference for coarse cereals, and I'll tell you the reason why for it. I mean, my conjecture was that maybe it's the inherent preference of the taste, or there is something else going on. We didn't ask about the substitution of rice or wheat, whether they want to substitute rice with wheat, I mean, because of the bipolar preferences in some of the states. But because anyway, the PDS portfolio has both rice and wheat. But we did ask the women whether they were ready to substitute equivalent of rice or wheat with some other commodity. And you see, except for Eastern UP, who were ready to substitute rice or wheat for any other commodity, most of the states, even in the combined all states, you see, they were not ready to substitute rice. So cereal was the king. I mean, there's no space for substitution. So this is a very, very simple, basic binary probit regressions and trying to understand the woman's preference for pulse in PDS. There is no significant effect if you see all across the states and Bihar, but just a negative expression in Eastern UP. Well, this is precisely because if you see women in Eastern UP, there were 76% who said they would like to prefer pulse. So, but I didn't show in the slide that there were 91% of men who said they would also prefer pulse. So in relation to men, women don't prefer pulse. So that's why it's a negative expression. So, but that doesn't obviate that women could prefer pulse. Another interesting is if you see that the scheduled caste, there's a negative preference for pulse. This is again a very puzzling. Like, why would, the scheduled caste, the caste would matter in their preference of the pulse? So obviously there is some other interactions going on in terms of whether it's the institution, whether it's the historical experience, whether it's their experience with the PDS. Another one of the pathways that we were also trying to see is the pathway of the homophily. So if the FPS, if the FPS dealer's caste is same as that of the beneficiaries, does it have an uptake in the PDS? We see that it's a negative expression, and I mean, Bihar and all states, you see that it doesn't make any difference if the caste is of the same, except for Eastern UP, but that I can say because the sample is predominantly OBC, it's 87% are OBC, so hardly there was any SC fair share price owner's caste. We have this fairly robust result because we have village-Vict effects. There are other controls also. So the observations are around more than 1,600 observations. So the basic regression results, as I told you, is preferences are really dependent on the caste, and the lower caste do not seem to prefer pulse. And so by and large, as I said, that there is no specific average gender effect except for a very weak significance level for the Eastern UP, and then homophily is really important for some caste. So that was really motivating for me to go to the qualitative, and that was the basis for which I took the mixed methods in trying to understand what was exactly going on and how these needs and preferences are actually shaped, and that really leads to the effectiveness of the PDS. So you see the key findings are that in Bihar, rice and wheat, they didn't want to be substituted with any other, and especially the rice variety that is delivered was not preferred. In Eastern UP, the rice and wheat, they were ready to substitute rice and wheat with pulse, and they were okay with the rice variety. But of course, quality of the rice and wheat across all these three states was a concern, of course. In Orissa, rice is still the holy grain. I mean, it is non-negotiable. Across the three states, coarse cereals was not preferred because there is a lot of social stigma attached to it. Like I'll make you go through the other slides where you'll see what people really say about the coarse cereals. And another is, of course, the more labor intensive because the millers have not yet found a way to really grind it and prepare it. So it again all comes back to the woman itself, right from grinding it, preparing it. So it's a very labor intensive process. And of course, there is no nutrition awareness about it. This was more pronounced in Orissa and Eastern UP, but in Bihar, though they were aware of its nutritive value, when women said that we know that it is very nutritious, but there's a very, very big social stigma attached to it. I mean, those who cannot afford rice, fine rice, will eat coarse cereals, and they are generally looked down upon. For the pulses, yeah, there was a buy-in. I mean, people were ready to go for it. I mean, one of them said, "Who doesn't like good things?" You know, but there was a very generic fear. The fear. I mean, they didn't trust this. They didn't trust the system. There was a diversion effect fear that it will be siphoned off, fear that it may crowd out the cereals. And of course, there was the fear of continuity. I mean, whether it will come, if it comes, like all good things like tea, sugar, where they were getting previously, that would also stop. Another one was the adulteration, and adulteration with Kesari dal in Bihar. So they feared that this was one of the main reasons. If pulses come, this is what they will end up having it. And of course, tea and sugar is something preferred. Coming to specifically for the preferences of women, we see that in Bihar, there is a preference for usna rice, that is the parboiled rice, over arva rice. So, and since they didn't get that, they either sell it, or they exchange for usna, or they feed the cattle, or they make do with some pancakes in the worst cases. And there is also a general perception that arva rice actually leads to gastric ailments, and if you see from the photo, I mean, it speaks much. I mean, as they say that photos speak louder than the words. You can see the inferior quality of the PDS rice. It's the bad odor, bad taste, its color mixing with stones. So these again comes on the woman. Their time used. They have to clean. They have to cook. So it has implications for the time use also. And what is happening is that because of this bad quality, their preferences is also being shaped because they are preferring wheat instead of rice. So what is happening is they're negotiating with the dealer that do not give us rice, anyway it is arva, anyway it is bad, so give us more wheat. So see how even the system and how it is working, how these institutions is actually reflected in their preferences. So I talked about even the pulse. There is a buy-in, of course, because not because of its nutritive value, but because it is very costly. But because there are other, but they are not ready to substitute with others because there are diversion effect. It is very dear. They know that the dealer it will never come to them. There is fear of the unknown also. I mean, amongst the lower caste especially. I mean, they will be the first one to be screened off, and there also fear that it might crowd out the cereals, First of all, they'll end up with just rice or just wheat instead of two products. So there is a very, very lack of trust in the system. And of course, there is adulteration. And they have also referred to other welfare programs where pulse is provided for, but it is misused by the Anganwadi workers. So this quotation from one of the respondents speaks so much. We would prefer pulse. If we get pulse, we can make rice and dal, that is khichdi. But we know we won't get it. Once or twice, the dealer will disperse, but then he will stop and siphon off supplies most of the time. The excuse he will give is, "Upar se nahi aaya." So that's very convenient, right? So you see what I'm trying to drive is that their experience with the institutions, the experience with how the delivery mechanisms is, actually shapes their preferences. Coarse cereals, as I said, there is a lot of stigma attached to it, especially in Bihar, and it is actually branded as a poor man's crop. And the preparation is also very time-consuming for women. It's very, very labor-intensive, and the millers haven't devised any way to grind it either. In Orissa, rice, as I said, is non-negotiable. I mean, 96% do not want to substitute rice with any. There is some space for pulse, of course. I mean, 56% actually said that, yes, we're ready to substitute rice with pulse. They prefer arva, which is being provided in the PDS, But the problem is the kind of Arva rice that is being given does not match to their dietary specification, because the keeping quality of rice is so bad that they cannot eat the stale water rice that is their because it's a predominantly tribal area, and that's their dietary specifications and preferences, and that doesn't match to what is being provided in the PDS. The coarse cereals in Orissa, again, there's no much uptake. I mean, they were not even concerned about it, and they was quite surprised that even the coarse cereals have to be provided in the PDS. I mean, they would say it's okay if you provide it, anything you provide in the PDS, we are ready to take it, but there is no really uptake, and they're not ready to substitute pulse or coarse cereals, as they are ready for an addition to it, but not with substitution with rice. UP was similar. I mean, it was very surprising, also nice to know that they were in favor of substitution of cereals, rice and wheat, and of course, maximum they opted for pulse. Maybe it has to do with the sample that we took. You know, they are more of farmers, they are agricultural laborers, and so there's no such landlessness as you find in Orissa and Bihar, and probably that is the reason why they're ready to substitute pulse. And in the qualitative also, we found that in the candid confession, they said, we take the rice and wheat from the PDS, but we then again sell it off to a nearby shop. So primarily, they are not very much in favor of even rice and wheat from the PDS. So there are issues around quality which are suboptimal, and that was across all the 3 states. So final slides, just to drive home some of the possible policy implications that, there has been a recent discourse around, there's a very top-down approach we have, right? We want to introduce a lot of things through PDS. I mean, we have the Right to Food campaign talking that we are giving cereals, but we should also look at distributing millets, pulses, oils, possibly even fruits, eggs, milk. I mean, it seems unbounded. So the point is, what I'm trying to drive is, it's a very top-down approach. We need to ask, what do the beneficiaries really want from this program? Because the program is meant for them. So we need to ask them, what do they really want? And we need to know the preferences is very nuanced. It cannot be so straightforward, that if you want pulse, give it pulse. No, it cannot. It has to be really, there has to be an in-depth understanding of what is the preferences, how it is shaped. So there is a need assessment is the basis of it. And why I said is that because there is heterogeneity. But anyway, naturally, you'll come back to me and say that there is a limit to needs assessment. How much will you do the needs assessment? That how granular can you go? So my take is that for aggregate policies, the design should be more effective in trying to understand their preference in terms of at least the product portfolio. For example, in Bihar, if the majority apply the principle of democracy, if the majority is saying they need Usna rice, then why are we feeding them Arva rice? So, I mean, as simple as that. And the policies in India are primarily based on demonstration effect. Like if Punjab has introduced pulse, so we'll also introduce pulse. If some other state has introduced something, then we also start introducing that, because we are not trying to understand, because it varies from state to state, from region to region, from district to district, from villages to villages. And more important is that, as I said, and my whole presentation has been about the gender context. I mean, you have to be gender sensitive when you are designing a program, because it involves the time use. So that is how your product choices will change, and also their experience with the delivery system. Thank you.